Mind is chief. This is a deep mystery. This is a deep mystery. As we walk this path, we have the opportunity to discern, to enter into the great mystery. This mystery is beyond words. We begin on this path and we hear about lots of words. We come to talks like this and hear lots of words. But this realization is beyond words. And what is it that takes us beyond words? We hear about these ideas and then something takes us beyond those ideas. What is that? What is it that is actually beyond conceptualization? Ethics are. Action is. What you do. Please hear this. You can say, I love you. That's words. But the act, I love you, is beyond words. You can't fit it into words. If you actually care for someone, if you actually sacrifice for someone, you can talk about that for 1,000,000 years, and it won't be as good as that one act. It's beyond words. It's more real than words. It's less made up than words. We wonder sometimes, why is it that people don't feel comfortable? Why is it that people don't trust me? I tell them I love you all the time. Oh yeah, and then what do? Well, then I steal from them and I abuse them. I hurt them. I ignore them. I degrade them. I don't know why they don't believe that I love them. This is really what it's like. We have to see the clear difference between ideas and then action. Action in body, yes, what we do with our bodies. Action in speech, yes, what we do with our communication. Action in mind. What are we doing with our thoughts, our understanding, our perspectives? These are forms of action, and each act is beyond words. Even if you take the action of saying words, the thing that's happening is beyond words. It's the deep, transcendent mystery. If we drop into this, we enter into something more real, more tangible than words and concepts. We realize we've been living our lives in a dream. But there isn't only a dream, there is this. When we see that, then we finally see how precious each moment is. Each precious moment is real. This is the thing that we actually realize. It's the point when this path finally becomes significant in our lives. Ethics, virtue, action is beyond words. And that means that it is a true sacrifice. It's a real sacrifice. Words are cheap. It's easy to say, I love you. That's why words are so useful to us. That's why concepts are so useful to us, because they're cheap. We could imagine many different ways to build this building. I imagine hundreds of different ways to build this building. I didn't have to build the building 100 times to see what it would be like. I could just imagine it 100 different ways. That's what's useful about words and concepts. But every time I imagined it, I was lying. Maybe you wouldn't say lying. I was experiencing something untrue, even though I knew it, so it wasn't a lie. It wasn't deceiving. I was misrepresenting reality. Let's put it that way. There was no building, but I could imagine a building anyway. The fact that thoughts, words, concepts are inherently misrepresentations is what makes them useful and what makes them dangerous. Because suddenly it's easy to delude. That's what makes our species powerful and evil. Because we're able to collectively delude so easily. In fact, it gets to the point when it's hard not to. We have to extract ourselves from that experience and enter the world of form, this world that most animals live in all the time. Enter it. Establish ourselves right here without modeling the world. Live in the world and realize that we can take action in the world. And from that perspective, we realize that even when we're modeling the world, even when we're using words, we're still, in fact, acting. It has an impact on the world. The way we see the world changes the world. It is an action. But we see how precious each action is because there's real sacrifice. What's in my life, some of the hardest things that have happened, and in many other people's lives, I know, the most pain happens when someone says, I know that you really need this and I'll do it for you. And then they don't actually do it. This is extremely painful. Because it matters what we actually do. You can say, I'll help you with that. If you don't help, you didn't do anything good. You have to then do the thing. You actually have to do it. But we realize once we're in this place of doing, we realize, oh, wait a second. That would be a real sacrifice. It was easy to say it. Easy to say I care about that. But to actually do something, that's a real sacrifice. Suddenly there are limited resources. I can think about helping people a lot more quickly than I can help people. We get caught in this idea, I need to save the world, I need to make the world be this way. And it was so easy that once we enter the world and realize the real work that would have to be done, we become confused and we say, well, I don't want the world to be like this. I want it to be more like the imaginary one in my head where I could fix it and make it the way I think it should be right away. But it's not like this. So I refuse to be a part of this world. No. I will force the world to be a part of my ideas. Then we've become, again, exactly the problem. And we say, well, there we are. I know it's the wrong thing to do, but I'm going to do it anyway because it's the only thing I can do because I don't have time because blah, blah, blah. Don't do it. Don't do what's wrong. If you know it's wrong, don't do it. Because what you do matters. It's very hard for us to understand this. And in fact, we try to use this path too often to say what we do doesn't matter. We try to use all kinds of emptiness, trash, to convince ourselves that it doesn't matter. Hey, whatever, doesn't matter, I'm equanimous. The Venerable Ananda, one of the main disciples of the Buddha, at one point was walking. It was a very hot day. He was very tired. He'd been walking for a long ways. And he came to a well, and there was a young woman next to the well. And he was so tired, and she was already drawing up some water, that he asked her, could you please give me just a little bit of water? Please, sister, could I have some water? And she was shocked and appalled. She said, please, sir, don't come too close. This well is for outcasts. This well is the water for those of the lowest in our society. I'm an outcast. I can't give you water. If I touch the water and give it to you and you drink it, you'll become impure because I'm impure. It's important for us to never forget the way the world is. It's important for us to never forget the injustice, the evil in the world. We can't come to a place like this and get caught up in the beauty of nature here and in the kindness of the community here and forget what's happening in the world every day. What I'm describing now is a horrific injustice, but it's commonplace in the world. Commonplace. Well, Ananda would not participate. And he very nicely, very kindly said, sister, I didn't ask about caste. I asked about water. May I please have some water? She said, no, no, no. Due to my flaws, due to my evil birth, I am of the lowest. I'm like an animal, and I'm a woman. I can't give you this water. Of course, we know that probably the conversation didn't happen this clearly. It's been changed for us so that we can understand what was really happening. But we know how these conversations go, even if it's all under the surface. He said, I can't do it. Because of my caste, because of my birth. And I said, sister, I don't ask about your birth. I ask about water. May I please have some water? Now, before I continue on, I'm not aware how much many of you know about these topics, but this kind of conversation has real consequences, meaning it can be dangerous. I don't know if all of you are aware of this, but this can be risky to start pointing out delusion in this way, social delusion. And so a third time, when we can understand what's happening now, it's frightening. And things actually do get frightening later on in the story. She said, I can't do it. I cannot give you water. It would be bad for you. And he said, I'm not worried about that. The Buddha said that a person's value is not determined by their birth. A person's value is determined by their action, by their virtue, by their choices, by what they do. That is what gives value to the world. That's how a person serves the world, not through their birth. Please, sister, give me water. And she did, which is a rebellious act. But before we get to the rebellion, she, at that time, could see. She had been taught by this kind monk that these words that we put on people, they're lies. We put the words on people, but they're lies. But by putting those words on people, we change the world and we make them true. People don't understand. You can't just say words are empty, so it doesn't matter. Words are empty. That's why it matters. If you call someone bad, you change them. If we accept the view, I am bad, that we have changed. There are real consequences. You can't avoid that. But at this moment, she could see through it. Oh, it's a lie. And suddenly, that could be shed. That self-perception could be, to a large extent, shed. Of course, this is a story. Things don't happen so simply in truth. It's just a story. We're talking about words. We get it. But we're trying to make a point now. If any of you have really done this work, you know it isn't like that. It's very difficult. You work hard for a long time. But anyway, in the story, she could shed. She could drop. There was Pakati. Pakati could drop that self-identification as worthless. As actually being an outcast. And it was for her at the time a joyful moment. It isn't always a joyful moment, but for her at the time it was a joyful moment. And yet, even though there was a little bit of liberation, it's very hard to become completely liberated. And as he drank the water and walked away, she thought, oh, what a kind man. He's so kind. And he's so attractive. He's so beautiful. He's so sweet. I need him. I can't live without him. He's changed my life and I need him in my life. I need to minister to his needs all the time and give him water every day. I want to marry him. I want to be with him. And so she worked on it. And the story of her trying to do that is actually quite an interesting one. You kind of fall in love with her during the story. She's so sweet. But we don't have time for the whole story right now. So she eventually went to the monastery where Ananda was and stood at the gate to the monastery. And the Buddha saw her there. He's such a sweet man himself. And he called her. He said, Pataki, come. Apakati, come, please. Let's talk. What are you doing here? So she came to the Buddha and she said, well, I met Ananda. He's so nice. He's so wonderful. He's so attractive. I want to marry him. The Buddha said, oh, yes. Well, that's very good. So let me ask you, what about Ananda do you love? What specifically about him have you fallen in love with? What in detail? Can you tell me? And she said, well, his eyes are so attractive. And his skin glows and so smooth. And the way he walks is so graceful. And the Buddha said, well, everything you've mentioned so far is about his body. But you know about his body, don't you? I mean, his skin is attractive, sure, but if he got a bruise, it would still swell up and it might get infected and pus would fall out and that would be disgusting. And he's just going to get old and sick and die. And if he did have that bruise, and if he did get old and wrinkled and he's on his deathbed, would you still love him then? She said, well, yes, of course. And he said, then it can't be his body that you're in love with, right? That's reasonable, yes. So then what are you in love with? What do you love in him? If you throw away all of these identifying characteristics that just come and go, what are you in love with? And she realized, she said, I'm in love with his kindness. This is so deep, it's hard to put into a story. That she directly saw through the imaginary labels we put on ourselves. With Ananda's help, with the Buddha's help, she directly saw through body. She directly saw through the form to see something even deeper. This kindness, this virtue, that's even more real than our bodies. That in fact is the basis of our bodies. She could see through it. And the Buddha told her, but that kindness isn't just in Ananda. That kindness is in you. Exactly the same kindness. This virtue is in you. You don't need someone else to be married to that, to live with that all the time. You have it yourself. And at this time she had a deep insight. And she asked to be ordained, to become a nun. She said, my desire for Ananda is gone, even while my friendship is deepened through this experience. We become even closer to each other by not being attached to each other. And so she was ordained, which brings us to the rebellious part of the story. Because this was a very dangerous act in terms of that society. To ordain an outcast woman. Because the Brahmins and the high caste people were accustomed in that place to inviting the Sangha, the Buddha and everyone else. This was early on in the Buddha's. It wasn't that ordaining everyone wasn't allowed. This was early on in the Buddha's teaching, and so it just hadn't happened yet that an outcast woman had been ordained. And it was just the first time. It wasn't the last time by any means. But it was a huge problem in the society because they were accustomed to inviting the Sangha over to eat at their homes. A lot of the time they'd bring the Sangha and they'd feed them, and they were afraid because they suddenly realized, but maybe an outcast woman will come into our homes. They all look the same. We won't know which one we should exclude. And the Buddha won't even let us exclude any of them anyway. We don't know how to handle this. And they were furious. Of course, the excuse was, we don't want this and that, but there are much deeper reasons. And the Buddha and his disciples had to deal with this. It was difficult. But this is what happens when you take an action. You actually take an action. Look at the difference. Ananda could have said, yeah, caste injustice is an evil construct. And yet for him to actually take water. I don't know if any of you have been in these situations, but it's these actions that get things moving. For the Buddha to actually ordain her, for that action to be taken, that is extremely threatening. And yet, that level of ethics was taken. That matters more than just words, because this realization is beyond words. And what is it that takes us beyond words? What is the thing that's more real than words? Virtue. How we actually behave in body, speech, and mind. What we actually do with our bodies, our communication, and our perspectives, our thoughts. So this is beyond words. Actions are beyond words. Does that mean that they're not real? This that goes beyond words, this direct experience without modeling it, is that not real because you can't describe it? Do words need to be employed in order to justify something? The experience, the valuing of ethics impacts the world. We go from these words, we say you're this and I'm that. We go beyond that, enter our basic identities, go beyond that. These highly complex constructs, we discard that, enter a more basic sense of identity. For example, I am this body, you are that body. Set that aside, enter action. What are we doing? Actually enter that. And from there, we continue on to that which is beyond even that, to liberation. But what is that? What is that liberation that goes beyond good and bad It does go beyond good and bad. You can't just say it goes beyond good and bad and use that to avoid good and bad. This level, this truth, Dharmakaya, if you can't even do these parts, this is just this part. If you can't even go through each of these stages and actually sacrifice how you live and how you think and how you talk, actually shift all of that to be of true service, of true kindness, which doesn't just mean making people feel good. If you think that kindness is just making people feel good, then you've degraded them to their feelings, saying you're your feelings. That's oppression, that's not kindness. Like saying you're a body. People are not just bodies, people are not just feelings, people are not just perceptions. You can't crush people in that way. True kindness is about liberation. That includes, of course, caring for people in mundane ways. Of course it does. You can't go against that. But you can't go against any of this. You get all the way to the point of clarity around, action has to be transformed. With that comes the power to go beyond good and bad. Without that being just bad. The most evil, according to the Buddha, and also according to many modern views, modern ways of looking at things, the most evil thing is the claim that there isn't a difference between good and evil. The undercutting of moral distinctions is the most egregious moral transgression. Of course, you can say at the same time that to go beyond good and evil is awakening, is the greatest good. Also true. What's the difference between them? What is the difference between these two? The same words are used, and yet the impact is totally different. Why? What's the difference? Is that if you have gone through this process of purification and truly become capable of actually relinquishing your life and sacrificing your behavior in order to come into accord with love, if you then transcend, then that's the best, most giving, most kind act. That is relinquishing your life, the greatest generosity, the greatest offering. But if you don't go through all that and skip it and still try to go beyond good and evil, then that's the most selfish, the least caring act.